Welcome to the Atlantic Council event, Distinguished Speaker Series 2015. This is our landmark event run by the Atlantic Council. I want to thank students who are participating in this event. I want to thank the diplomatic corps representatives and of course the NATO Embassy in Tbilisi. I'll be remiss not to mention the tremendous efforts and support from the Rooms Hotel administration, and this hotel is becoming the key place for discussions on the foreign policy and security related matters, and more to come. Please follow our agenda and join the consecutive events. Today we have a rare privilege of hosting such a distinguished guest from the NATO headquarters, Ambassador Marriët Schuurman, the NATO Secretary General Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security. Ambassador Schuurman is a career diplomat from Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs with a fascinating career in diplomacy, promoting foreign policy interests of Kingdom of Netherlands. Before taking this position, she served as a representative of Kingdom of Netherlands in former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, and currently she is the key pillar on every single aspect related to the women, peace and security at NATO headquarters. Welcome to Georgia. It's a real pleasure to have you here. It's not a surprise to say that today's discussion will unfold around the NATO's policies and NATO's efforts aimed at eliminating all barriers that prevents women from equal participation in all processes, especially in the processes related to the security, stability, and peace in the Euro-Atlantic area and beyond. And partners as well as NATO allies are united around the landmark resolution, United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, and consecutive resolutions, 6 resolutions, which all together form the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So, Ambassador, it will be very important, and I'm sure the interest is huge to hear from you the details and the insight why the UN Security Resolution 1325 is so important, especially today, and what NATO is doing, what NATO has been doing to further promote the goals and the aims of this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I don't have to explain anything further because the things have already been said by another expert on 1325. So thank you very much for that. And thank you all for coming. It's really nice to see such a big group of young and interested people. So what I will try to do is not, to have too much of a formal speech, but really sort of set the scene and to allow ample room for questions, follow-up questions, and also for interaction, because I'm also very interested to hear from you how you perceive the relevance of this magic number, 1325, for our peace and security. So, as an introduction, shortly, what is 1325, why does it matter, and what do we do as NATO and allies and partners to implement that resolution and the 6 related resolutions that followed. So 1325, as I normally trying to explain, was adopted 15 years ago by the UN Security Council in the year 2000, after the lessons mainly in the 90s, in the Balkans, but also in Rwanda, which taught us, and many of the women organization activists actually have been teaching us, that we cannot achieve lasting peace and security as long as we continue to exclude half of the population. So the core of Resolution 1325 is to promote equal participation and equal opportunities for all to actively contribute to peace and security. Sometimes I summarize that simply said in one line, which is it's a very large agenda, but it basically comes down to one line: no women, no peace. So remember that, you have the whole agenda. And the agenda has different aspects, so it is definitely about better understanding how conflict and insecurity affects the most vulnerable groups, which is, unfortunately, women and children. So how often already existing inequalities are exacerbated by insecurity and conflict, and how our actions and operations then again have an impact on those power relations, inequalities, how, if you want to avoid a negative impact, we can mitigate those risks by smarter interventions. So it's on the one side better analyzing conflict in a larger, in a more inclusive way, in trying to take a full scope and not only looking at the male part of society and talking to the male, which are often active actors in fueling conflict, but look at the entire population, what their needs are, and better responding. So there's a protection part, but there's also, and this is the main part, it's a participation agenda, as I said. We cannot allow to leave talent untapped when it comes to finding better solutions to better peace and security. It is, on the one hand, it is the right of people, this is part of our value system, equal rights and opportunities. Everybody has the right to contribute according to their capacities and their will and their dreams, and at the same time, we can simply not afford to leave talent untapped, and particularly not in current security challenges that we're facing, and rapidly evolving security challenges. And here in Georgia, I don't have to explain what kind of challenges these are. We need all the creativity that we have and a comprehensive approach in order to be able to respond to what we now call hybrid warfare and terrorism. So that is the full agenda of 1325, as they like to say here in Georgia. They always talk about the 3 Ps: protection, prevention, and participation. And the participation is the key. Equal participation and equal opportunities of all to contribute to peace and security. So, coming to NATO, bring it a bit closer home. What has NATO been doing? So NATO, obviously, is not a member of the United Nations, but our nations are, our allies and our partners. And we see it as our role to support our allies and partners in living up to the commitment that they entered into in the year 2000. And how do we do it? We've been trying to translate this very vast agenda of women equality, of gender equality and participation into what it means within the NATO mandate. So 2 core issues in the NATO action plan that has been approved last year. And it's important to say that the NATO policy and action plan was adopted by NATO, by all its 28 allies, and by 55, in total 55 nations. So 28 allies, the partners in Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council, including Georgia, and 6 global partners. So 55 nations signed up to the NATO Action Plan, which complements your national action plan, and specifically focusing on the NATO mandate. So 2 core components. One is to reduce barriers for active and meaningful participation of women in our own security institutions. That is not only NATO headquarters and sub-commands, etc., but also the institutions, security institutions of our allies and partners. And the second major overall objective is to integrate a gender perspective in our day-to-day security business, and particularly in missions, operations, and crisis management, and in training and exercise efforts. That was the agenda that we agreed in the NATO action plan. We have printed copies of the action plan. You can also find it online, depending on what you prefer. The policy and action plan are online. We also put some copies there. Under these 2 objectives, there's 14 specific outcomes that we're targeting, but they're summarized in these 2. Why is this such an important agenda for NATO? As I said, because we believe that gender equality is first and foremost part and parcel of the community of values that we are meant to defend. NATO was built to defend a world and peace, built on individual freedoms, democracy, rule of law, and human rights, and equal opportunities and equal participation, and part and parcel of that foundation, which is the foundation of our peace and security. So we see it as a fundamental thing to live those principles, to promote them, and to make them translate them into practice. And the other thing is, as I already referred to, we've also learned, particularly in operations in Afghanistan and Kosovo, that it makes us more effective. It allows us to do things smarter. If we have women in our own forces, we can reach out to the full population, something that men cannot do, because in Afghanistan a man cannot publicly talk, interrogate, interview, or even let alone search a woman. We need women to have full access to the full population, and also to reach out, to listen to the voices of women and how they perceive their security challenges and the answers they see of solving and improving security in their country. So having women in our troops, enough women in our troops, but also applying this gender lens, specific way of looking at security, has allowed us to be more effective, to be better aware of the context in which we work in, to be smarter in the interventions that we have, with less risk and more support from the population, and who are therefore better contributing to lasting peace and security. So this is what the Secretary General likes to say. Gender equality isn't optional. It is fundamental. It allows us to deliver better and smarter, and respond better and smarter to the many complex security challenges we are facing today.
Thank you very much, and it will be fair to say that we all subscribe under the goals and the principles of the common endeavor which unites us under the UN Security Council Resolution 1325. Actually, it was really nice to hear the words of the President of Georgia, who went to the Parliament and delivered their State of the Union address, where he particularly stressed that the 7%, around 7% of women currently serve in the armed forces of Georgia, which is a very important result, and the tendencies towards the growth, since the Georgian armed forces enjoy the highest level of trust among the population. So thank you very much for the comprehensive analysis of NATO's efforts and partners' efforts in terms of promoting the women, peace and security agenda. And needless to say, many things and many important things have been achieved, from Chicago summit to the Wales summit. In Wales, allies, heads of state and government, and the partners gathered, having a lot of challenges on their plate. And of course, Georgia came back with a strong package which will boost our security and bring the country closer to the NATO membership. But it was also visible the NATO allies' commitment towards the United Nations Security Council resolution. And the next summit is down the road in 2016 in Poland, and there is an anticipation that even further progress will happen. Can you please depict what has been achieved so far since we all, allies and partners, left the Wales summit, and what are the key milestones as we gear up for the upcoming NATO summit in Poland?
Well, when it comes to Wales, obviously, during the summit of Wales, the head of government and state have formally noted the new action plan and basically kicked off the implementation of the new policy and action plan, and also agreed to nominate a special representative for NATO. In this case, before that, it was a person who was a diplomat seconded by the Norwegian government, so I'm the first one who's really a NATO official. So this, I think both the policy action plan and having this dedicated person in the NATO establishment is a sign of a serious effort to really institutionalize the Agenda 1325. I think it's also worthy to note that in the Wales Summit Declaration, the heads of government and state have recommitted to the importance of this agenda, also recommitted to the importance to better prevent and respond to sexual violence in armed conflict, but also to a certain extent enlarged already the agenda compared to what is in the action plan. Because in the Wales Summit, they have said that integrating a gender perspective in all three core tasks of NATO will contribute to a more modern and ready alliance. So it is very much part also of the readiness efforts, and it explicitly also refers to collective defense and not only to crisis management and peace operations. So basically the Wales Summit has already sort of heightened the standards that we have to live up to beyond, let's say, almost this action plan, which is until 2016, setting the agenda indeed forward. So I think that is a major development. That we recognize that gender equality is very much also about our own security and how we better defend the world order that we have established after the war. When it comes to the implementation of the action plan, concrete deliverables is something that we are close to delivering on now. One of the first deliverables of the action plan is to adopt, and it's now in the hands of nations, military guidelines for the prevention of sexual violence in conflict, which will probably be the first, let's say, military political organization to do that, to have military guidelines, which involves a need to have indicators, more early warning, better analysis, to incorporate, let's say, risks and reduce risks for sexual violence from the planning process to the execution process, and also to provide practical tools for training and for reporting. So this is in the hands of the nations now. The draft is out, and it's one of the most, I think, highlighted deliverables of the new action plan that nations have been waiting for.
Thank you very much. It was visible the continued commitment of the Alliance towards this agenda. Creation your position as NATO Secretary General Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security, and very active efforts of the NATO Committee on gender perspectives. Both are clear statements how serious NATO is about the implementation and taking forward what has been agreed during Chicago and what has been agreed in Wales. Now I would like to bring in to the discussion our dear friends, participants of today's panel, and ask them for comments and questions. Please identify yourself before posing a question or making comments. Please be active.
Madam Ambassador Marriët. Thank you for coming this afternoon to talk with us about peace and security. I'm interested in more the practical aspects. So you are perhaps the most knowledgeable person to ask this question. If you take a look on the action plans of different lines, so every country has its own action plan. Can you talk a little bit with us about the similarities and differences, about the obstacles that prevents more engagement in foreign security policy making in countries? Are there any similarities? Are there just particular nation crafted ways to overcome these obstacles, or they are just more general nature?
I think if you look at the different national action plans, obviously the national action plans are supposed to respond to specific challenges that countries have, and they differ from country to country depending on what kind of position they're in, on their own security situation and what specific cultural context they have. If you compare different action plan, I think you can largely distinguish, let's say, between the traditional old allies who have a very external focus of the action plan. So you take, for instance, the action plan of the Netherlands or UK. They're very much uniquely focused on crisis areas, post-conflict areas, and what has to be done in order to implement 1325. So very much a protection and participation agenda, but focused on other countries. If you take the Georgian example, it's interesting because Georgia has two aspects, you know, a country that is confronted with insecurity, affected by conflict, post-conflict and conflict, as well as a contributor and an exporter of peace. So it has two components. Personally, I like that very much, but as I said, It depends obviously on the situation and the cultural context, also what kind of priorities country take. So some action plans prioritize more the internal agenda in terms of what they have to do, for instance, to increase the percentage of women in their armed forces or in political decision making, depending on they are. And some countries focus more on what they should do in terms of better operate in areas of operations. I don't think there's necessarily a best, a good and a bad example. It's very, as long as it's tailored and really focused on the specific priorities and context of every country. And they're often complementary, the action plans as well. Like national action plans are complementary to what we have in NATO or the other way around. I think that is also very important to recognize this sort of complementary action, how we strengthen each other. In terms of challenges, you already referred to the NATO Committee on Gender Perspective, which has been doing over the past decades very important work in terms of fostering and encouraging a higher female participation in armed forces. This is, I think, a common challenge, honestly. I think this is something that allies and partners, irrespective of what, let's say, security their situation they're in, it is a sort of a common, very similar challenges that we face in order to increase the percentage of women in armed forces, and particularly in combat positions. Now we all have different systems, we all have different cultures and different values, but overall the percentage for NATO allies is low. It's 10.6% women in armed forces and only 5.7% of women in our allied troops in operations. So it has to be increased. And the NATO Committee on Gender Perspective in June will have a conference where they present a study that they commissioned analyzing the data, the annual reports of all the allies in the past 13 years, or from 2000 until 2013, the data that they provided both on the composition of their troops at the different levels, but also their gender policies, intimidation or anti-harassment policies, etc., etc. And we hope that the outcome will be presented in June, and I really hope that that will be the basis or a start of a discussion and sort of a lessons learning exercise. Why are that we sometimes are different, culturally very close, have very different percentages, and what can we learn? What kind of policies prove to work in order to increase the percentage of women? Because I think we by now all agree that the percentage has to increase for us to be more effective.
Thank you. Gentle lady over here, please.
Thank you. Let me introduce myself. I'm Anna. I'm a fourth-year law student, and at the same time I present a civil society organization, Partnership for Human Rights. I just wanted to inform that in Georgia there are around 50 to 100 young women leaders which have been trained on the UN security resolutions on women's peace and security by the help of the government of Sweden. So we have been working on this issue for some time, and we really are happy to meet you here. So my question refers to the issue of sexual violence against women. We know that there should be quite important and big reform, not only in the security sector, but also in the sector of justice and judiciary. Could you please tell us how it is important to introduce gender-specific justice in the NATO-allied countries in order to have a standard of investigation and restitution of the cases of sexual violence against women?
That is a very big question. Maybe first of all, before I get to your question, I'm very happy to know also that you took the floor as a representative of civil society, because something that I didn't mention but I find really striking in Georgia is the very active engagement of civil society on the women, peace and security agenda. And I think the very strong cooperation between civil society and government and international organizations is a model for other countries to follow. So I would like to compliment everybody, both civil society and the government, for this very active interaction, cooperation and engagement. And I think that really greatly contributes to the relevance of the Georgian action plan and activities undertaken. On the issue of sexual violence, I think it's, I would distinguish between, let's say, domestic violence. Regular is never regular, you know. So the overall phenomena of sexual gender-based violence and domestic violence and conflict-related sexual gender-based violence. But in essence, I think the response to it is the same. I think there's three key things, and one is to break the silence. This is not a private issue, it's a societal issue. And we know for domestic violence, it perpetuates from generation to generation, and it excludes entire generations, not only the victims, but also their children. So it is, as a society, we pay a price for it. So it's very important to get it out of the private sector into the open. Also to realize that, as Hillary Clinton normally says, you know, sexual violence is not cultural, it's criminal. So that is the second aspect. It is criminal, and we have to stop impunity. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that we have a properly functioning system for reporting and for following up. And we need a whole chain of justice, from the social workers, the neighbors, the teachers, you know, the social environment of families, we must be in the families where this happens, up to the whole prosecution chain and the legal chain. It requires an enormous amount of effort to raise public awareness and also to increase the knowledge and expertise throughout the judicial chain. And if I may, if you then translate that to specifically sexual-based violence in conflict, that phenomena is something which is not new. I think it's important to realize that this is of all times, but it's very good that finally it gets due attention, and sexual violence is being used often as a weapon in a systematic way, and often a weapon of mass destruction. And it's not something that we can, you know, keep for better times to deal with. We have to deal with it from the root. And this is why early warning indicators are so important. That we pick up a system, that something systematic is going on, and that there's a link to a command structure. First of all, to better respond, and secondly, to ensure that in later legal processes, which often cannot happen in conflict but after, that we have sufficient proof to prove that this has indeed been used as a systematic tool and as a weapon, and often as a weapon of mass destruction or a tactic of war, so that after the war justice can be done. Because it's of incredible importance for the victims and their surroundings that justice is done. And the last point, and I think again it's for both domestic violence and this is specifically conflict-related violence, the local communities have an enormous role to play, not only in signaling and reporting, but also in reintegrating and reinsertion of victims, and not to expel them, but to allow them to have a normal life after that, because the stigma shouldn't be on the victims, the stigma should be on the perpetrator.
Thank you, Ambassador. We've discussed the importance of the NATO action plan, and of course every NATO ally has its own national action plans to promote this agenda, but also the partners play a pretty important role in this process. I'm particularly interested to hear your assessment how Georgia is doing in this regard. We have our own action plan, and how Georgia has been promoting the agenda of women, peace and security from your perspective, and also what has been the main highlights of your visit. It's been already 2 days, I guess. You were in town.
It looks like a week, but I think it's 2 days.
Yes. You met a lot of individuals, Prime Minister, you had good meetings in the Ministry of Defense. So we would like to hear your assessment about Georgia's efforts and main highlights.
First of all, I have to compliment Georgia for having a national action plan, because not all allies have a national action plan. So 17 out of 28 allies have a national action plan. Obviously, we encourage the others to follow the Georgian example and also have a national action plan. Not because, you know, it's nice to have a plan on paper, but, you know, practice, just experience shows that it's, you know, it keeps us on track. It's good to set targets and to know where we are and to have a clear direction. It keeps us sharp. I think for the Georgian National Action Plan, well, let me say the partnership part. You know, Georgia is key partner in operations, is the second contributor of troops to the resolute support mission. So it's a very key partner in our peace operations. But overall, I think the partnership is extremely important, also for implementing 1325. And it's a bit of a two-way process. I think 1325, as I always said, trying to get this other way, to internalize another way of looking at our security is a matter of change. It's a change process. And like every change process, it takes a long time, and there's two key things that will allow us to make a difference. And the first is political leadership, and the second is partnership, to build coalitions of change and to learn from experience, also to see what common challenges are, and to share expertise, experts, tools, etc. So partnership is key for basically building up a sort of collective pressure on moving this agenda forward. That is one part. On the other direction is that I think the women, peace and security, the gender equality aspect, has proven to be a very important platform for deepening the already existing partnership. First, because it does link to the common values of equal participation, equal rights, non-mutualities, that we have in common, the allies and the partners. This is what we jointly committed to. And I think it's very important that we live up to those principles. The best way to protect those principles is to live them. So to lead by example is of importance. So it's a matter of principle, and this is why I think 1325 is a very important foundation almost for strengthening partnership. And the other aspect is also that we have a lot to learn. And what I like about this agenda is it's not that the allies do better than the partners. This is really an equal partnership of mutual learning and mutual support. And this is how I also see my role, to be like, the point for exchange, to learn from what I learn here, to bring a bread from Brussels, and at the same time bring from Brussels and the allies to Georgia what Georgia can use. So it's a very equal footing, this partnership, and that's I think also why it has proven so effective in deepening partnership relations overall.
Absolutely. So question from the floor, Ambassador could tell you, gentlemen afterwards. Let's pass the mic.
Thank you very much for a comprehensive description of the agenda, and it's really encouraging to hear that Georgia is doing quite well in terms of utilizing these opportunities. My question is that there is an agenda to create an opportunity for women to participate more actively in the security sector. But on the other hand, it's important to empower women to participate, to help and to provide an opportunity. So what are the elements of the educational engagement policy from NATO side to empower women in Georgia to be more active and to feel more confident while taking the different decision-making positions in security?
Well, for NATO specific, obviously it is, as I said, it's up to the nations, in their systems and their cultures and their specific political traditions, to find ways in which they can reduce barriers for active and meaningful participation. So NATO as such, we obviously actively work in our own institutions to see how we can improve the gender balance and have more gender-sensitive policies as well. At the same time, we encourage our allies and our partners to also design policies to allow for more active, to create a space for active and meaningful participation of women on issues of peace and security, be it in troop composition, staff composition, political positions, peace processes, etc. I think our role as NATO is, as I said before, it's mainly to share and to serve as a platform of exchange for best practices and lessons learned. And the conference in June that I referred to before, I think will be a critical, a very important moment which will allow us to share those experiences and best practices. So we actively encourage allies and partners as I said, to enhance active and meaningful participation in their own security institutions, both civilian and military. And when it comes to troop generation, so asking for national troops, obviously it's the troops of nations that are NATO troops. In that process, nations are actively encouraged to make sure that they have a proper gender balance at all ranks. And we ask them also to provide proper gender expertise in the form of gender advisors and gender focal points, and to ensure that the troops that come on peace operations are properly trained pre-deployment on gender perspectives, so that they come with basic awareness of what integrating gender in military operations means. So this is more from the planning side and the preparation side, what we try to do in supporting the nations to deliver on this.
Great. We have a question from gentle lady over there, and then gentleman here.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. First of all, thank you for your visit. I'm Tom Wachita, representing the Atlantic Association of Georgia. My question is, what main changes has been made by NATO after around these 15 years, after the UNSCR 1325 was adopted, generally and specifically? Thank you.
Well, NATO ordered, and its allies had ordered a review in 2013 to see how far we got in integrating gender in our operations, and specifically Kosovo and Afghanistan, what has been achieved, and also to come up with a recommendation on what needs to be done. I think if you look specifically at specific achievements of NATO and as alliance as a whole, we have, I think, managed to definitely increase awareness, and particularly in terms of integrating gender in planning and execution and reporting of operations, but also integrating gender in training and exercises. We've gone a long way, and there I think we're far ahead of many other groups, international corporations in the field of peace and security. Where we still, the main challenge, as I said before, the main challenge that we have is that we have to further integrate that. It is still not fully internalized, so we really have to make sure that this is part of our professionalism, that we have a comprehensive approach to security, including a gender perspective, part and parcel of day-to-day work in our institutions. That is one thing, to internalize it. And at the same time, adapt it to the new challenges that we face. This is what I said as well. Now, also adapt it not only, to countries in conflict where we have operations, but also to see what it means, this other way of looking at security, for better protecting our own peace and security in-house. And one of the fields where we still have a long way to go, as I said before, is to increase gender participation, women participation in our own troops. Both NATO headquarters, if you compare NATO to other international organizations at the decision-making level, we're not doing good, not good enough. So we have to improve that. And similarly, if you look at the composition of our civilian and military staff in operations. And this is, I think this will receive a lot of attention, probably a new commitment that we have to enter into in order to how we can really make a big leap in that respect. And it will be a collective effort. The other major challenge, as I said, is to adapt the concept, so to say, to current security challenges which are in-house and at our borders. And we're not used to a comprehensive approach when it comes to looking at our own security. So to look at very concrete and acute threats in terms of how our values and our world based on diversity, individual freedom and equal rights actually makes us stronger, and how we can more effectively use that in better defending and promoting the values that we are meant to defend. And this is more sort of at a strategic level. We still have to develop those strategies, those comprehensive strategies, more than, let's say, blatantly speaking, diplomatically speaking, Cold War kind of strategies in responding to something that looks like something we've seen before, but is something new. So this is, I think this is sort of a mind-boggling exercise, which has just started a collective effort to have better and more comprehensive strategies in facing new security challenges.
Could you please talk a little bit more about your cooperation with other international organizations, which is really key in promoting this very important agenda?
We have obviously very active cooperation with the UN, particularly UN DPKO, peacekeeping, but also UN Women and personally with the Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict of the UN. NATO-wide, we have started staff talks between NATO staff and UN, so we try again to, as much as possible, share tools, expertise, training opportunities, lessons learned. So with the UN, it's a very active and almost day-to-day contact. But we're also actively cooperating with the EU or OSCE, for instance, when it comes to Ukraine, and the African Union. So I think those are the key international organizations. And I think these partnerships are key because we have to work from the complementarity and the difference in mandates in order to better, to have more comprehensive approach.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question from the gentleman, third row.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sandro from Trinity Open University. Today we are talking about women's role in security, but if we take Georgia, we know that in Georgian parliament women is only 7%. I'm interested if you're working with Georgian government in this topic, and what can you do for promote the Georgian women politicians?
The first thing is that it was sort of a pleasant surprise to notice the very active debate about this issue. And I think that it always starts with that this is an issue of public debate. And it's also interesting to see that apparently the Georgian population, if I understand the opinion polls, is very much in favor of seeing more women in parliament. Now, as NATO, we're not going to present the answer. But obviously it has to do with, it may have to do with certain, stereotypes or certain cultural patterns, but also with the electoral system. As I said, we can again, share experiences from other countries and how they address the issue and how they got more women in parliament, depending on the background and the cultural and the electoral system that is in place as well. The question that got most, particularly from civil society, was, should we or should we not have a quota system? Now, again, I will not give the answer. I will not tell Georgia what to do. The only thing that I can say is that, particularly in post-conflict countries, what you see is that a conflict also opens doors for women to take on roles that traditionally they didn't have. And this happened all over. It had also happened in Europe after the Second War. During the Second World War, the men were fighting, the women took over the factories. And also the administrative and support roles at the headquarters of defense ministries. What you then often see is that once the peace deal is signed, they are sent back home, and the men come home and take on their traditional roles, and you see a backfall in women participation. If we want to avoid that, a quota system as a temporary measure has proven very effective in post-conflict countries that have applied that. But I think it's, as I said, it starts with obviously a common will that there should be a better representation of women in parliament, and then to find out, what the best way is to arrive at that goal. And I think that the public debate is very commendable in this.
Some questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you for visiting to Georgia. Thank the Atlantic Council of Georgia for organizing this event. I'm Rati Bakhtadze, Executive Director of the Atlantic Treaty Association of Georgia. My question is regarding conflicts in Georgia. How do you see the women's role in conflict resolution? And does Georgia have to increase women's engagement in Geneva and Abashidze-Karasini format dialogue?
I spoke to representatives of IDP community, conflict-affected communities, and I did understand that it is a challenge to create space for more active and meaningful participation in women in conflict resolution. I think it's of key importance, and that is also part of the resolution 1325, is first to make sure that we give IDP women and women in conflict-affected areas a voice, that we listen to them, and that we try to create a conducive environment which will allow them to sit at the table. I also know that it's a long process. Sometimes you have first a second track and sort of indirect input into negotiations before they have their place at the table. The starting point is really that's of key importance for the population, the most affected population, to also have an active part in solving the solutions. Also starting from the lesson and the knowledge that we have, that women can be a particularly powerful agent and advocate for peace. And that inclusive peace processes tend to come up with better lasting solutions. So it's also, I think, in everybody's interest to make sure that negotiations are inclusive. And I do understand that there's many challenges, to achieve that for different reasons. But it starts, I think, with listening to the women in those communities and to understand what their needs are, not to assume that we know what their needs are, and to see how we can best support them in, over time, getting their rightful place at the table.
Great. We have a question. Yes, please.
Good evening. My name is Kwanza and I represent Atlantic Treaty Association of Georgia. You have already mentioned about women's engagement and their contribution to the NATO-led missions, like in Afghanistan, and what aspects they can work for. But if you could speak more about how can they be more effective? How can women be more effective than men working for those aspects? Thank you.
Well, Afghanistan, the operation of Afghanistan has given us a host of examples. So what I already said is in a cultural context where men simply cannot reach out to women and privately talk to women, in order to make sure that we have the full scope of what is going on and what the needs of the local population are, we need women in order to tap into the 50% of the population we should otherwise miss. And again, it gives you a larger perspective of what actually the needs of the population are, and also what the entry points are to solve and resolve conflicts. So that is one reason why we need more women in our troops, in order to have better access, also more trust from the local population, to do no harm. I mean, if you're a kick-off search operation, you kick the door of a household and a male marine comes in, that is the end of your operation. You lost all trust and you create an enormous risk for casualties in your own troops. So the commanders I spoke to that were in Afghanistan said, if we did kick and search, the first one to do it, the one to kick and to enter is a woman. And it saves me body bags. So it's also, it's less risk. It is access to better information. Female engagement teams or mixed engagement teams, having women in your engagement teams, they tend to come back with more and better information, which then also allow you to better design interventions. And maybe as a last example, for instance, searchers. So searchers, the body searchers, obviously a man cannot do that to a woman. So So the fact that we had trained Afghan female searchers for the polling stations, that simple fact allowed Afghan women to come out and vote. And never before has the turnout of female voters been so high as in the last election, because we could secure that with female searchers. Also female searchers or female police officers at checkpoints. We see increasingly a phenomenon that a person in a burqa may actually be a threat. You don't know who is in that burqa. If it's a man or a woman, it's an excellent way of conceiving all kinds of things. The only police officer that can search a person in a burqa is a female officer. So it's also of key importance to have women in our forces and to train enough female soldiers and police officers in Afghanistan in order to better do the work, to better understand the context in which we're working, to have better responses, and also to protect ourselves better.
Just to continue the operation piece, it's crystal clear that the partners and allies together made a huge difference on the ground. We managed to decapitate the Taliban, we managed to have peaceful elections of the president, and now we have government there. And what was the most important related to the women, peace and security agenda, we all together managed to empower women on the ground and made real changes. They have now better access to the education, they vote, they participate in different peace support day-to-day business. But my question is how sure we are that we will be able to sustain this progress, what has been achieved so far, considering the significant drawdown of the operation. And are we confident that we will be able to build on what has been achieved as we move forward with the implementation of the new operations and new agendas?
I think this is indeed, the biggest responsibility that we took on our shoulders to make sure that we sustain what has been achieved. And obviously the resolute support mission as an entirety is not a combat mission, it's a train and assist and advise mission as a different mandate with far reduced capabilities, and providing security is first and foremost the obligation and responsibility of the Afghan authorities, with a lot of training, etc., and support with the Afghan security forces that will have to provide that security. And we've seen last year already, in anticipation of the withdrawal, an increase in violence and attacks. So it is an enormous, I would almost say, moral obligation we took on our shoulder to assist the Afghan authorities in keeping that space. I do think we have two key assets. First, we have extremely strong and courageous Afghan women, which I'm always amazed of, that in a cultural setting which is definitely not encouraging them to speak out. And they're often threatened, they risk their lives and they continue to speak out. And they've developed strong networks as well. It's a key asset. They won't easily be wiped out from the streets, That is one thing. And the other very important thing is very strong, as I said, for leadership. The president, I met him last week in Washington, and he is a very explicit advocate of women's rights. He lived up now to the commitment to have 4 female ministers in the cabinet. He has been very explicit in saying, I want our daughters to have the same opportunity as my grandmother had. And this also puts it in the right perspective. His wife, who he gave a very public position, also said, we have to reconquer our past. Because the past 20, 30 years of war, this is not our culture. This is not our Afghanistan. And Ullah Ghani then in her speech went back to the times of the Prophet to illustrate all the female leaders and female public persons in the history of Afghanistan, to say that this is our history and we have to reconquer that history and that past. And I think that very strong will of this leadership is very encouraging also for the women. It's very important to have that very strong push. And yes, it's going to be enormously challenging to keep that space also when it comes to negotiating with the Taliban, etc., etc. But I think and it will also require a lot more in terms of training and assistance in order to really get Afghanistan to be also a full partner in this respect. But I think the fundamentals are there. And the women will not give up their space anymore, and the government is really committed to ensure that space. And I think that's very encouraging.
It's really important to keep this pace of development, and that's why we Georgians are contributing there with considerable number, realizing that what has been achieved so hardly, we need to sustain, we need to maintain all the stability, we need to continue the good pace of development on the ground and build on the progress which has been achieved together. And I want to use this opportunity and send, on our behalf, send our warmest regards to the men and women in Afghanistan who are now in the hardship positions, and especially our Georgian men and women in uniforms. Thank you for their service. We have a question from, two questions, gentle lady and then also gentle lady, so you choose.
Thank you. I'm Fatima Mukadze, I'm professor, Dr. of Law and Chief Consultant of Supreme Court of Georgia. I think the participation in a political decision-making process is very important for women, but at the same time, according to greater value protection techniques, I think we need new trends in order to increase political involvement, real political involvement in the decision-making process. And I'm interested in your opinion about new trends, new future trends in order to increase political representation of women. Thank you.
Like political representation, like representation in the armed forces, is interestingly enough very different from country to country. And it's probably very closely linked to indeed stereotypical roles and division of roles between men and women in societies. So there's not a one-size-fits-all, I think, on how to increase political participation. I mean, we had discussions about this as well. If you look at the Netherlands, we have a relatively high percentage of women in our parliament. However, it's always a struggle to get enough female ministers. And in our companies, you really have to look hard for a female director. If you go to the US, it's the opposite. It's very difficult to increase, for instance, the percentage of women in Senate. And one of the main reasons being that you need an enormous bag of money in order to run an electoral campaign. And apparently men are better in raising money than women. I don't know exactly, but there seems to be an issue, a money issue as well. And Georgia again has other issues. So as I said, we all have our differences. But what we do have and should have in common is the will and the conviction that we should have equal participation. And then to start discussion, why is it difficult in certain spheres in your country or in my country? And I said, what is difficult? It's different from country to country. I noticed that whereas I see a very active role of women, a very visible women in public administration and at the highest political level, indeed, it's sort of a mixed picture. How come then the percentage of parliament is so low, and the percentage in armed troops, and particularly in combat positions, is also relatively low? Somehow, there must be something there. I think it starts with understanding what kind of cultural perceptions and traditions that may originate from, and if we all agree that it should be different, then what to decide collectively what can be done to further empower women to take up an active role in those spheres of society. But I think it always starts by, agreeing on a principle and having the courage to analyze in depth what within your own society may actually be a barrier for women to take up their rightful roles.
I'm actually glad to see my friends, heads of departments here in the audience who lead very important department in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Defense, and in the National Security Council. So this is a clear example how we are progressing in this direction. So we have a question from
First of all, allow me to thank you for a very interesting talk regarding this very sensitive topic, I would say. However, International Legacy University, you just noticed that NATO experienced problems itself, having lack of female representatives on decision-making positions. And we often observe that gender-related issues are grouped with soft issues, let's say, not with hard security issues. How NATO feels if it's actually possible to move gender-related issues to hard security issues. For example, Swedish foreign minister recently declared that women's rights, their political participation, is a national security issue. Is it the way to go for the EU as well?
Yeah, I think it is a core security issue. Hard is always difficult to say. It is a core security issue precisely because of that. It's a national security issue because, as I said, we know that exclusion leads to instability. We can only, have a stable and resilient society if we're inclusive and not exclude certain parts of the population from living up to their full potential and living up to their dreams. So it is directly affecting our own stability if indeed, we're convinced that our peace and security is built on individual freedom and fundamental rights and equal opportunities for all to contribute. So it is a core security issue. When you come to NATO as an institution, as I said, I admitted that also as an institution, if you look at headquarters or also at the commands, definitely in terms of percentages of women, it's a long way to go. The initial look looks nice, you look international style, NATO headquarters, 37%, not too bad. The thing is that in the decision-making positions, it's 21%. It has increased enormously, let's say, compared to 15 years ago, but we see a stagnation and a flattening of the trend. So also we have to do some soul searching to understand why. And one of the interesting things, what I find fascinating, that it turns out that also for civilian positions in NATO, only 25% of the applicants is women. Now, what are the kind of candidates we're looking for? Generally, is international relations, security policies, peace policies. Who study those studies? Majority women. They don't apply in NATO. They do apply in the UN. To put it bluntly. So, is there something with an image or with an organizational culture that makes NATO less attractive as an employer? And again, I said, if we are convinced that we need more women, we have to adjust and to make sure that we cater for those needs. And I also always say, if we miss out those talents and skills of the women, and we're not attractive for them, then you can bet that we're also not attractive for a lot of men that we also want. So, I was, when NATO forbid me to make a certain parallel with a certain title, a certain movie and book, but it is very grey. As I said, we have enormous security challenges. We need more creativity, and we know that in order to be more creative, we need more diversity and more thinking power from all parts of society, from all countries, men and women, equal representation also of all the allies, and in terms of age. And not, basically what is indeed the average is, I think, a 51-year-old grey male person. That's the average NATO employee. That's not the kind of organization, we want. So this is a challenge also for NATO internally in how we're going to do it. Two specific steps that we've undertaken. We still have to do the analytical part to fully understand why is NATO apparently less attractive to female professionals. But the other things that we've done is in terms of to guide recruitment decisions, our human resource departments has designed scorecards per division and unit, where they give the management the data on the composition in terms of gender, nationality and age. So that when they do recruitment for positions, they know how they compare to other divisions and units and what kind of person they will have to look for if they want to perform better compared to the others. So we're trying to increase the peer pressure. And the other thing that we're just launching now is a mentoring program for women internally, which is also open for allies and partners at headquarters level in order to make sure have a larger pool of professional women to choose from, to select, to move up to the higher levels. Because at the highest level, as you can all see on television, when you look at ministerial councils and you look at the top leadership in NATO, it's totally male-dominated, and this is not the image that we want of our organization. Luckily, we have a female spokesperson and a female right hand of the section, but otherwise, no, a long way to go. Yes.
And it's very promising that the agenda women, peace and security is always evolving. Just recently we heard about the new campaign, which has very Georgian name, he for she. It's always he for she in Georgia. So. And the Secretary General just signed up for this initiative, and we clearly understand the main motives, how to empower men and boys to play a more active role in promoting this agenda, women, peace and security. But could you please explain a little bit more in depth what for this initiative stands and how Georgians can contribute?
Yes, well, the He for She campaign, as you know, in itself is a solidarity movement where male leaders commit to create space for active participation of women. And equal participation and equal opportunities is two sides of the equation, in gender. Women can never do that on their own. They need the men, and particularly the male leaders, to actively encourage that, to be aware also of their own sort of stereotypes and limits, but to actively promote and work towards a better gender balance in their organizations. So the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg is personally very active advocate of gender equality, also as a Prime Minister before, and is very happy to sign up to the so-called Impact 10-10-10, where they're trying to get 10 political leaders, basically heads of state. So let's say Jens Stoltenberg is head of state in that category, heads of very big state. Heads of state, 10 heads of multinational companies, corporations, and 10 university leaders, all male, to sign up to actively encourage in their own organization active involvement and promotion of women in leadership roles in their own organizations, and also to test and pilot practices and approaches that could be copied by their peers. So a very leadership role, and as I said before, leadership is key. And well, to bring it back to Georgia, I think you mentioned the president. It's very important that he declared, I think, 2015 as the year of gender equality, 2015 as the year of gender equality, and also leadership in Ministry of Defense, top level leadership, and particularly also by men in creating the space for women to fully contribute to society and to their societies and to shaping the future of their societies is key. So this is the idea of the big global movement. And yes.
Questions?
I hope that many more will follow the Georgian presidency.
Definitely. We should encourage our president to sign up for this initiative too.
Yeah, he already made a statement, so I have a pin for him.
So I think today we had very inspiring discussions about this very important agenda, women, peace and security, and I'm particularly glad that today you are able to deliver the messages on the first hand to the students and civil society organization representatives who are very active in this field and who try to be watchdogs and promoters of this agenda, and also encouraging government to do more and to employ more efforts in order to further promote these key elements of the UN Security Council 1325. So please help me to thank our dear colleague ambassador. All the best to this very important initiative and endeavor, especially since it's in such a credible hands. in the hands of the Ambassador Schuurman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.